How do I know what my purpose is? How do I make sure that I don't miss it? Life is fine, but how do I know I'm living up to my potential? So there's good news and there's bad news. And it's not really bad news. It's only bad news if we have our perception of, there's going to be an equation, or there actually is an answer, or there's a, cookie cutter way to know it. So the bad news is that there isn't an answer in that way. There isn't an equation. There isn't a cookie cutter that gives it to you. None of us comes into this world stamped with, what our purpose is. And yet, the good news is much bigger. And the good news is that our purpose, our potential, is about who we are much more than about what we do. And we tend to focus it on what we do. And so, for example, who you are is consciousness. Who you are is divinity. Who you are is love. How you express that is going to be different from the way that Taraji expresses it, different from how Anuradha and Claudine express it. We all have different packages. It's also going to change throughout your life. But when you focus on the role I play as though that were your purpose, you do miss your purpose and you drive yourself nuts. But this is where we've gotten really misled. And it's much more a Western affliction than an Indian affliction. What happens a lot, and this isn't the only situation in which it's happened, is that the West grabs a hold of a piece of deep, ancient Indian wisdom, and with good intentions, tends to kind of pull it out of context, oversimplify it, and end up giving it back to its people in a way that in many cases creates a lot more problems than it solves. And this is one of them. Because in the Indian tradition, we speak a lot about your dharma. We speak a lot about that, your dharma. But your dharma is not something as simple as grocery clerk, gas pumpist, hairdresser, or even the prestigious ones, CEO, president of the world, whatever it may be. That's the role you play. That's the role you play. The dharma is who you are. But because we've gotten so focused on thinking that it's going to come, my purpose, my potential is going to come in the form of something I'm going to see in the classified ads one day, and I'm going to just open it and immediately my eyes will go there, or it's going to come in my inbox, or if I, eventually I'm going to find it, it's going to be a job, it's going to be no. I mean, it's possible it could be. It's sometimes, occasionally they overlap. I think Gandhi's job as the leader of the movement was also his dharma. But I think those cases are very few and far between. the Dharma is who you are, and it's with you 24 hours a day. A Dharma is not something you do 9 to 5. But we go crazy and get frustrated and get depressed and, go through midlife crises and have all of these things happen because we've been really indoctrinated into believing someday I'm going to figure out, is it yoga teacher? Is it president of the universe? Is it head of an NGO? Is it stay-at-home mother and gardener? Is it... Well, those are roles you play. And during the course of your life, you very well could play all of them. I mean, if you live a long life, you certainly could go from being one of those to being another to being another. You could do them all. You could do several of them during the course of a week. You could have one thing you do on the weekends, another thing you do 9 to 5. But if you are expecting your 9 to 5 to be your Dharma, to be your purpose, you're setting yourself up for a lot of frustration. And so what I would say to you is, yes, you have a purpose. But that purpose is going to come from knowing who you are, much more so than figuring out what your job should be. Because who you are, the scriptures are filled with stories of great rishis who were cobblers, who fixed shoes. Well, if they lived today, they'd say, I know I am put here for something bigger than this. This cannot possibly be my calling. Like, shoes? Really? But fortunately, at that time, there wasn't quite this disease yet. And so the idea of doing the work of a cobbler and being a rishi, why not? Sure, I can sew shoes and expound on the Vedas at the same time. Why not? One I do to put food on the table to feed my family. The other I do because it's who I am. And so if you focus more on simply moving through the world as who you are at the deepest level, and this is why we meditate, to experience that. That's how you know who you are. I can sit here and say, your consciousness, your divinity, your love. But that's not going to benefit you until you experience it. You can't live as that because I've told you that's who you are. On a more superficial level, it doesn't matter how many people tell you you're beautiful. If every minute you look in the mirror you think you're ugly, you feel horrible about yourself. 200 people could say you're beautiful. It doesn't matter. You have to look in that mirror and feel beautiful for it to have any impact on you. In the same way, I can say to you consciousness, love, divinity, soul. But if you're still going yoga teacher, whatever, that's not going to sit. You've got to experience that. And then once you've had that experience, you may be a cobbler, you may pump gas, you may wait tables, because consciousness, unfortunately, is not something they're paying a lot for these days. There used to be a time in history in which people were supported to just meditate. That there was a value given to that. We live in a different time. So you may be pumping gas, you may be waiting tables. You may be doing 100 things. You may be pumping gas and waiting tables. But that doesn't mean you are that. It's not that your dharma is waitress. That's to put food on the table. When you're connected with who you are and living that, you're living your dharma. And here's the thing about dharma. It's not always fun. That's the other misconception we have, is that when I know what my potential is, it's going to feel so great. It's going to be really big and important. I'm going to recognize it. People will recognize it. And, you know, the greatest teaching on this, for me at least, is in the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna begins by saying, that which seems so right to most of us, forget it, I'm not fighting. Let them keep the land. Who cares? And Lord Krishna says to him, no. I mean, he says a lot of other things, but one of what he says is no. Because your dharma is to restore dharma. That's what you have been put on earth to do, is to restore dharma to this land. These current rulers have removed the dharma, adharma. Unrighteousness is ruling the land. Corruption, greed, untruth is ruling the land. Your dharma is to restore dharma. You don't get to run away from it. And yeah, you're going to lose a lot. It's not going to be fun. But as he says so beautifully, to die on a battlefield, fulfilling your dharma, is the higher purpose, rather than living for hundreds of years safely and, you know, peacefully, but not fulfilling your dharma. Now, not all of us have dharmas that take us onto a battlefield like that, thankfully. But it's an important reminder that fulfilling my dharma is not always glamorous. It's not always fun. It doesn't mean you're not going to lose people you love. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be in pain. But that's your purpose. That's what you're here for. But even remember, that was the battle was one part of Arjuna's life. His dharma of restoring dharma, well, that was his whole life. That wasn't just on the battlefield. That was the time when it was difficult to do. So instead of focusing so much on what to do, focus on who you are. And then do what needs to be done in your daily life. And sometimes it's waiting table, sometimes it's pumping gas, sometimes it's doing the laundry. Sometimes it's fighting a war. Knowing that when you have courage to see who you are will manifest itself to you. We all have the divine in us. I mean, the beautiful aspect of the Bhagavad Gita is here you have the divine, Lord Krishna, in form, saying to Arjuna, here is who you are. And here, therefore, is what you need to do in this moment. Oh, and by the way, you're not the doer anyway. So forget all of that, ego stuff and guilt stuff and fear stuff and power stuff. It's not you anyway. Well, it's all inside of us. I mean, the most enlightened commentators of the Bhagavad Gita are all in agreement about one thing, which is that battle is inside. That battle is inside. Which means that that voice is inside. But sometimes it tells us things we don't want to hear, and so we don't listen. We literally pretend we can't hear. Not consciously. But we protect ourselves from it. So open yourself up to it fearlessly, courageously, but without any delusions of grandeur. Because what is grand is consciousness, is love, is divinity, not president of the world. You know. So it doesn't matter what form it takes. What the world needs is people living as love, as consciousness, as divinity, much more than more rulers. Even more than more teachers.